Hello, welcome to another fascinating episode of Soul Sessions.
Yeah, one of our favorite series. We've been talking about the brain, and in this episode, we're going to talk about the brain on God, or your brain on God.
Yes. What does your brain look like when it's on God?
Yeah, the G word.
Or is God on the brain?
Not gangster, but but God.
Yes. So we're going to talk about the biology of what happens when we have spiritual experiences. A lot of people have had experiences in their life where they see things that are metaphysical and maybe have visions and dreams that seem beyond just the normal functioning of rational thought. And how do we see? How do we experience God through the brain and through the psychology of Jungian psychology?
Yes.
So we're ending this series. I just want to review. We talked about the brain on success. We talked about the brain on love. We talked about the brain on health and wellness. And so this is the last of the series to talk about we saved the best for last, the brain on God.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about our perspective so that people know where we're coming from. So there's three areas that we study as students of the mind. One is Jungian psychology, of course. We delve and use his model of the psyche for our understanding of personal transformation, what's going on in our individual mind when we talk about pretty much anything. The other one is the current neuroscience. We look at that to see if it supports what we're doing and to see if there's actual scientific evidence from neuroscience that backs up what we're doing.
Yeah, so we're not just saying, this sounds kind of cool. Let's teach this. So we look at the research.
Yeah, Jung himself said it's important to live in your time, which means what is the biggest paradigm of our time? It's definitely science, scientific data and information.
And what's really interesting is this idea that we think neuroscience and science is boring and takes all the mystical parts of our life out, but actually with all the new research on quantum physics and perception and what they're really learning about the brain is actually very mystical. And so we want to just invite you to not poo-poo the brain when it comes to God, because it's very, very fascinating of what we can do.
And then thirdly, we really base a lot of our philosophy and our worldview, like the paradigm that we use for the overall work that we do, on the Upanishads. They seem to be like the source of all spiritual and religious, philosophical teachings around the world. Somehow they were born in that specific area of northern India, Pakistan, around there, and then just kind of spread throughout the world in different ways, maybe telepathically, we don't know, but...
Jung would say through the collective unconscious.
Absolutely. Well, so the Upanishad, let's start with that. They say the truth is always one, but the wise call it by many names. And so this idea of God, of course, you're going to experience and find it expressed in many, many ways around the world, as the Tao, as God, Yahweh, as Ometeotl of the Aztecs, who had this kind of idea of one God who invents himself and is at the center of creation. Many, many different ways of expressing that same truth. And that's the beauty of human nature, of course. So let's begin with the biology, because we are talking about the brain. What is going on in the brain when people have these transcendent experiences, visions, prophecies, dreams that speak to them about God, or appear to them to be God speaking to them through their dreams.
So let's talk about the biology.
Yeah. So the brain, it appears, is really designed for this. If you ask, well, do we need such a large brain just to survive? It's obvious that we don't. A little bird, a little hummingbird can survive in the world and do just fine. And they don't have much of a brain system. They have a basic nervous system that just gives them information about where to find food, shelter, how to reproduce, and that's survival essentially. But human beings, I mean, we have this very complex, infinite, just incredibly intricate system in our brains that allow us to self-reflect, to think about what's possible beyond what we see, what we experience through our senses.
So we're not only just reacting in just a bunch of neurons. We actually have a consciousness that can see and be aware of itself, which is very powerful.
Absolutely.
And so why would we be conscious of ourselves? Like what would we need it for? And that's really the idea that these higher concepts of living, these deeper questions we ask ourselves, like what's the purpose of life? Who am I? What is God? What is, spirituality? What is, the meaning of all this? So that part of our brain opens up those questions.
Yeah, so we love the Upanishads because they're not really metaphysical. If you read the Upanishads, they're very practical. They're simply kind of stating and beginning with what we know, what everyone knows and experiences in everyday life. The three states of mind, which is waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Right? So nothing metaphysical. It's not asking us to, believe in some
other world.
Yeah, some other transcendent reality. It's simply, can you observe these three states of awareness and start to think about what do they mean? What's happening in these three states? So when we're awake, we're seeing our, like what we call reality. When we're dreaming, it's another game, right? The mind is creating like a virtual reality that we move in. And then when we're in deep sleep,
we have in memory that we are aware that we don't remember that state. Like we're aware that there's a period of time where we were not aware. Like you don't say, I remember every 8 hours of my sleep. You say, I think I remember a couple of dreams, but the rest is, I'm aware that I wasn't aware at that point.
That's right. It's the awareness of the absence of content.
Yeah. The emptiness.
Yeah, there's a period where we just kind of experience nothingness for a while, or what appears to us as nothingness.
We sip the nectar of immortality.
So with those three states in mind, then we begin by asking, well, if those three states of mind are the foundation of our human experience, where does the experience of God, of transcendence, of the divine come in? And it really comes in this way. Let's say, in our waking state, there are certain nervous system mechanisms, brain systems, neurotransmitters that are operating that help us dampen the activity of the brain so that we stay focused on what we're perceiving.
So for example, like there's this idea of like people that aren't very focused, or ADHD, that part isn't as strong because people are distracted a lot. Would you say that?
That's one of the theories of the executive functioning of the brain, the neocortex, which is a new part of the brain, the outer covering. a lot of its work is about controlling the impulses that come up from the lower parts of the brain. And when that control mechanism isn't working properly, the impulses come through and the person doesn't have impulse control or isn't able to focus their attention where it needs to go. And so they experience what we call ADHD, hyperactivity, OCD, however it manifests.
People don't, and so it could be an extreme like addiction and things like that as well, right?
That's right.
That kind of not being able to control your functioning in a way.
Yeah, the control is like one of the main mechanisms that are operating when we're awake. It has to do with this monoamine system, a neurotransmitter that helps the brain control and dampen the billions of impulses that are coming through continuously to keep us awake and keep us in reality.
And that's because our brain evolved from animals and the natural world, and so we have these like raw, wild, instinctual patterns that we've inherited through our genetics, through years and years and that millions of years of evolution. And so that's why we have to have this, because otherwise we'd be out of control and wild.
And so when we're awake and we're happy and we're enjoying life, the dopamine system is kicking in and we're experiencing a good time. In essence, we're having a great time. So that dopamine system, when we dream, is very active. It's almost it's as active, or even sometimes more active than when we're awake. So
is that why we feel so good in dreams?
Yeah,
there's a lot of energy there. And
most of the time, we're feeling good in dreams. We're experiencing incredible things. But what the difference is between the waking and the dreaming state is that the monoamine system is shut off, so that the brain essentially becomes disinhibited during dreaming.
So that's why the dreams are so wild, and we're actually sometimes even out of control. Like I remember one time I was like, had a dream I was screaming at my boss, and I would never do that, but it's like kind of those impulse controls are not dampened. So like your true like anger or frustrations or joys, even if you kind of feel sad, and it's an ability to feel happy, and floaty. And a lot of people claim to have these numinous dreams where they just feel like this really beautiful state of joy. So that's what you're saying, is that this part of your brain isn't saying this isn't real and don't be realistic, and it's just really riding the wave. So that's why some people have like a nightmare, some people have these epiphanies in their dreams. So it's that kind of that spectrum of emotion and experience we sometimes don't have in our wake life, because we're so dampened and kind of, and even socially, right? We're socially like we have to stay in this like mediocre kind of, don't be too happy because then you'll look crazy, and don't be too out of control because then you'll need help. And so just kind of stay with the crowd and kind of numbing life in a way.
I mean, that's one way to see it, absolutely. But if you think about what nature was doing there, well, you have to survive. So you cannot be in a rapturous state
every day.
If a tiger is out to get you, you're going to have to be very alert and very concrete into how am I going to survive? How am I going to hide from this tiger?
This tiger. So let me ask you this. So that we talked about love in the brain. So this is also the mechanism that when we fall in love, the rationality gets suppressed. Yeah. So we fall for people that don't really fit into our social structure, or don't really fit in what we really want consciously, like it's an illogical love. Is that why? Because of the same mechanism? Similar?
It's similar, yes. But in dreams, then, if you think about it, what we're experiencing is like a psychotic state, because that state of mind of dreaming, let's say the neurochemistry and the way it looks, the way it shows up on brain imaging studies, is very similar to somebody with schizophrenia or somebody having a psychotic episode.
Wow.
So the only difference would be that the person with a psychotic disorder doesn't have that filter to dampen the impulses
of what is reality. And
yeah, and so they're experiencing a dream-like state in their waking life.
Oh, wow.
And you can imagine how disruptive that would be. I mean, if things appear and disappear, and animals or people appear and disappear just like in dreams, but you're awake.
It's not like unstructured almost. The reality is kind of chaotic.
The reality is very chaotic, very kind of driven by self-referencing. But there's also this element, and this is where Jung kind of started, because he was working in a mental hospital in his early work. He observed that people with schizophrenia were often hyper-religious, hyper-spiritual, that they were thinking of themselves as gods or God or Jesus or Buddha or somebody kind of...
Like and they always like have this, like, I know the truth about everything that's going on. And like I could see like kind of an arrogance in a way, like that they know things that the normal people don't know. You don't see that person standing there. Well, I see them. So,
and that's started him thinking about the collective unconscious that you mentioned, which is kind of this idea that maybe we're tapping into like a larger mind structure that we all share, and that it contains the history of mythology, religious ideas, spiritual practices, all kind of collectively. And that through dreams, through visions, through spiritual practices, we're tapping into that collective unconscious and drawing inspiration from there.
So we don't want to be like out of control where we have no impulses at all, but we also want to be not so dampening it so we don't have any creativity or access to these other states of being.
Well, yeah, because
if you think balance.
Yeah, if you think about spiritual practices, they're ritualizing those psychotic experiences into something useful that we can then use in our everyday human culture, and bringing those things into culture as practices, as ritual. Right.
And so if someone came from another culture and watched this religious ceremony, they may think, like, if that's not your culture, you may think it's just kind of wacky and strange. But the person in the culture is like, oh, this is just how we ritualize this experience.
Yeah. And so, like we said in the beginning, it's always a brain-environment interaction. And for human beings, of course, our environment is culture, not so much just nature anymore. We evolve in that state of nature, but we created our own nature in a sense. We create a culture, and we use language to define what is real and what do we agree on what is reality. So at the psychosocial level, the way those brain mechanisms are thinking about God, are thinking about visions and ecstasy, religious, spiritual ecstasy, then become what we call religion, right? They become our way of expressing some of these ideas that come from dreams and from vision in an everyday cultural setting.
Is it because the ritual basically kind of contains, like the ritual acts as more of a container for these experiences, so it symbolizes the experience in the physical world, so that you have an image in your mind and then you have a ritual in the physical world to kind of bridge the two?
Yeah. The ritual...
Kind of rationalizing what you see in this like wild instinctual world, the spiritual world, and then you're kind of here going, okay, well, I'm going to light a candle and I'm going to do these things that wave the feather or dance or, all those things to kind of ritualize the kind of undefined in the spiritual mind?
Yeah, so everyone knows the practice of baptism, right? Baptism, and it's a universal. It's not only in Catholicism or Christianity. It's a universal practice. There's always like a ritual that says, welcome to the human race, welcome to the culture, welcome to the tribe. Now you're part of us. That baptism, what it's saying is that you're entering now this human life, but you're coming from spiritual life and you are spirit. But often people forget what the ritual, what the original intention of the ritual meant. And often people practice these rituals without really understanding, right? Why do we want to baptize our kids?
Yeah.
Because everybody does.
Why do we want to pour water on a baby's head? And then I remember, I was raised Catholic. I remember my mother told me that I'm eating the body of Christ. And I was like, I'm eating like the body? And I'm drinking the blood of Christ? Like it just seemed so like when to a kid, when you don't understand. But then it becomes so ritualized. But those ideas come from even more ancient rituals.
Yes, and then you can add, this is Jung's idea, of course. He said these myths and rituals that all humanity share, we didn't invent them.
Yeah.
They simply arose because that's the way we feel ourselves to be, that we're coming from this deeper reality into this human life. And then the rituals and myths
already
help
in
us.
Our conscious?
Yeah, they help us make sense of those things. And they're already part of that coming to being.
Yeah, so the ritual's the merging of spirit and matter, basically. I remember when I was in Denver, back in the early days before I met you, I went to this seminar. They had an Indigenous Healers Day, and so they brought in all these chiefs from different cultures, different tribes, all over the world, and Native Americans and the Zulu tribe, and they all started sharing kind of what they do for clearing and calling in the higher power and God, and they were all looking at each other like, oh, we have that same thing in our culture. And they basically, a lot of the rituals, they were completely different spiritual disciplines, from their culture, but they had the same rhythm, the same thing. So that's what Jung discovered too, is that this collectively, we do have this experience of God in ourselves that we can tap into. So it's natural. And then so the brain gives us that opportunity because of that piece that kind of unhooks during night or through visualization that allows us to have more of a spiritual experience.
That's right. And so Rumi says, in their seeking, wisdom and madness are one and the same. We see this kind of idea that if we don't actively practice this understanding of our spiritual needs, in a sense, our spiritual nature, and the spiritual nature of the mind as well, then it turns into madness, right? Then there's that chance that it's going to be expressed as madness in some way, because it won't fit into what we define as culture and reality, which is what's going on with kind of the modern ethos of, we can explain everything scientifically and rationally, and let's get rid of the mythologies because they're kind of childlike, or that's so ridiculous. It's like missing the whole point of what we know from literature, from mythology, from religious studies. That's not what's going on. Or that's not a good way to deal with these things. We have to develop a psychology, a philosophy, a way of understanding that very human need
for God or higher power and spiritual experiences.
That's right, for transcendence. Because if we don't do it, we do it at our peril, basically. Nietzsche, Jung, all kind of pointed to this idea that the destructive power that you saw in World War II, where people pretty much on a worldwide basis just went crazy and started destroying everything, was a result of that kind of loss of that base of the death of God, in a sense.
Yeah. And or there's also people that use God to create terror, and they use the name of God to, and they're missing the point basically, and so the human mind can do that. And so what happens in the brain? Let's say we do have this like senses, the reality of our senses, and then there's these other things like intuition or experiences that we can't explain, kind of seeing the future, intuition, like prophecy, or having a dream about something and then having it show up in your life. So what part of the brain is it because that piece that's not suppressed, that tells us this is reality and this is the way things are, is basically that's turned off at that time, and we're more tuned into this other place or more expanded reality?
Yeah, psychologically, we can think of it as a temporary dissolving of the barrier between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. And not only, let's say, the unconscious mind in the sense of our conditioning, our programming, but Jung's idea of the collective unconscious. That now, when that kind of state of mind happens, where we're able to connect both conscious and unconscious, then these numinous symbols arise. And what he meant by numinous, meaning they have this spiritual, religious quality to them, this power that is able to transform the individual, but also transform the culture. So if you think of history, symbols have played a big role in the big shifts that happen in history. Somebody has a vision of a cross and it changes history. Somebody has a vision of the Buddha, meditating and having a transcendent experience, and it changes culture, history. So these symbols are really operating continuously, whether we acknowledge them or not. So Jung's idea was simply that we have to acknowledge them. We have to understand this mechanism of these symbols arising from the unconscious and having this powerful effect on humans. If we ignore them, we ignore them at our own peril.
That's a really good point. I was thinking about people that want to have spiritual experiences, and they're looking for some kind of like, I'm going to leave my body and I'm going to float on a cloud and I'm going to see the future. Like it's kind of this, like almost like a grandiose way of working with your life. And we do have those experiences, but then we discount the whole symbolic life. And we can basically live every day in a symbolic way, every day. Like something shows up, it's like a reflection of something in our mind. And the symbols are there in our life to show us and guide us from the unconscious that are right in every just normal living. And so that's, I think, the way we can bridge the spiritual life and really live a true spiritual life. We don't have to go to the Himalayas. We don't have to go on a spiritual retreat. I mean, it's nice to do that. You can do that, but you don't have to and wait for that to be in your life today. And so when Jung wrote the book Man and His Symbols, that's what he was essentially saying, is that the symbolic life is really the spiritual life. Yes. And because we can't really define God, like if we think of the idea of God, some people think of the old man, but if you think of universe, like a lot of people, think of their spiritual life as the universes. But what's the symbol of the universe? Is it galaxies and stars? Like we need a symbol to relate to it, not just well, the word is a symbol, but we need symbols to relate to what we're really talking about.
It is
because
very
it's an
much
invisible idea until we put a symbol to it.
Yes. So William Blake says, the imagination is not a state. It is the human experience itself.
Wow.
So what he's pointing at is this understanding that we imagine the world. So what we call reality, where is it happening? It's happening in our imagination. The world does not exist the way we perceive it. I mean, there is a world, of course. There's a reality, but our experience of it is very much our own mind. It is our construction of it, our understanding of it, our interaction with it that we're seeing. And so when we ask where do the gods reside, where does the God come from, or what is that relationship that I can have with the divine? It is through our mind, through our inner experience. And it puts things in perspective for us that if we want to change the world, we have to go inward.
Got to change but not just our thinking. We have to go deeper than just the thoughts and feelings.
Absolutely. But it begins there.
Yeah.
Because if you're misreading what you're perceiving and you're thinking the world is out there the way I'm experiencing it, you're in a kind of a delusion. So it's the opposite now. Who is the one that is having a psychotic experience? It's the normal person, essentially, the one that sees everything as external and the external is some kind of absolute reality. That's madness.
Well, Shankara, someone asked him, like, so you're talking about enlightenment, but if we're already enlightened, then who's the one being enlightened? And he said, well, who's the one asking the question?
That's right.
And he just laughed, like it's so ridiculous, because we are thinking that we're not aware, but we really are on some level. And it's just that understanding that it's kind of a mind bender in a way for us to because we are so certain of our reality, because our senses, the survival part of our brain shows us this is real. I could touch this. I believe in this. And then there's people that have that openness to see that there's something beyond the physical, the metaphysical. But how do we really work with it without becoming superstitious, without using fear and a kind of separation, and even feeling arrogant that you can do things that other people can't do? It's really how do you really balance that out in for a person? Like what would be the best way to work and approach this?
Jung says, well, it's a gradual deconditioning of your mind. Because if you start out with this idea that we're conditioned, we're misperceiving the world. There's nothing wrong with it, right? Because it's based on survival. And so, yeah, we need to survive. But we're misperceiving the absolute reality. What we're seeing is an apparent reality that helps us survive and helps us kind of make sense of the world and feel like, yeah, I can manage this. But he says there's a stage then when you're ready to mature to that real human experience of transcendence. He called it individuation, where then you're ready to let go of that initial stage of existence.
Is that why Jung said life begins at 40? Until then, it's just practice. And I find like there's different levels of personal development, and there's the ego building, personal development, and understanding that your thoughts create your life. And I think that's a critical part. You have to start at the beginning. Okay, well, my thoughts create my life, so I do have some power. So that's step one. I can change my thoughts and change my reality. Wow, I can be more motivated. I can talk to myself and motivate myself and actually effectuate change. That locus of control starts building. And then I think the real breakthrough for me was when I did shadow work, and I realized that I'm seeing myself in other people, and that projection and understanding projection. I think that's the next level. But I think first we need to kind of feel that we have agency in the world, and we can change something in ourselves, that we can change our life. And then you can go to shadow work, which is more, now you're seeing that yourself and other people. You're seeing these conflicts that show up. They're showing me my mind. And so we're getting like that kind of individual experience of that oh, things aren't always as they seem. And through that, I think it's like a practicing ground to go to stage 3, where we're actually now seeing ourselves in this state beyond the ego. But we need those other states. You can't go from stage 1 where, oh, I can create my life and I'm just going to manifest things. Like, you need to do the shadow work in between. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing, is they don't do the shadow work, and then they're trying to go to these spiritual experiences without kind of going through that personal, like, resolution within themselves of what am I really dealing with in the world. And spirituality, I think a lot of times becomes a place where people want to escape the world, versus, as Jung would say, you want to integrate the conscious and the unconscious. You don't want to just go off and go to, escape, like an escape mechanism. So how do we integrate? And I think shadow work is a great first step to do that. And then Jung's whole individuation process is all about that.
Yeah, so we go back to kind of the starting point, these 3 states of awareness that the Upanishads are talking about: the waking, the dreaming, and the deep sleep. It says there's a 4th state, thank God, that, no pun intended, that resolves all 3 states. In other words, it is the ground of those 3 states of mind. It is the source, the true absolute reality that never changes, because if you notice, our waking state is always shifting. And like we said, it's not really giving us a true sense of what's real. It's more like a survival mechanism that helps us understand the world, make sense of it. And then the dreaming state, of course, is continuously changing. It's this kind of psychotic state of mind where everything is possible.
And there's no barriers, no walls, no rules and regulations.
And then the deep sleep state is kind of giving us a sense of that peacefulness, and it's restorative and keeps us sane. But it says all those 3 states are not the absolute reality, because they're continuously changing. The absolute reality is that ground of being that people have called God, the Tao, the absolute, the self.
And what happens to the brain in that state?
When, let's say, the aim is the realization of that 4th state, the realization of the true self, of what is the true essence, the true ground of our being. What happens when human beings experience that is that they become that. They become that themselves. In other words, you're no longer identifying yourself as the temporary state of mind and kind of being tossed around by all the shifts and changes that it's going through. You are standing on the ground, on the real ground of being, which is the self, the pure awareness, God,
the unchanging.
In some of the Old Testaments, you get a glimpse of that kind of reality that they were pointing to. Some of the mystics, of course, always talk about this ground of being that is the absolute reality. It is the true essence of what the universe is. The over-identification with the persona, with the ego, throws us into this chaotic state of ever-shifting, ever-changing.
And you were attached, or ego's attached to getting things and achieving and moving and up, like a roller coaster. Like, when we get the things we want, we're happy. When we don't get the things that we want, we're disappointed. We want, kind of like a constantly rearranging everything in our life to get to a state, and then it goes away. It's like you can't really hold on to it from the ego perspective.
Yes, but the Upanishads, what they're saying is that ultimately those 2 things are one. The ever-shifting appearance of things, the Maya, the magical movement of the universe, and the absolute reality cannot be separated.
They can't, because if there's something moving, there needs to be something solid to see the movement.
That's right. So very much like when you have a dream, if we can ask, does that dream exist anywhere else except or apart from the dreamer's mind? And we say, well, no, it can't exist anywhere else except in the dreamer's mind, or let's say in relationship to the dreamer's mind. And if two things cannot be separated, if you can't experience them separately, that means they're one. So this apparent reality and the absolute reality, because they cannot be separated, you cannot really experience them apart, then that means they're one.
And I think for me, the way I experience it, just in a very practical way, is the practice of non-attachment. When I'm in that place of non-attachment, I get a glimpse of that solid ground, because that part of me is not caught up in the Maya. But I can watch the Maya, but I could be non-attached. And so, Buddhism, Vedanta, they all talk about non-attachment. And that's why it's so important, because it's not only like, oh, if you're non-attached, you get the things you want. I mean, I think people think, oh, just don't be attached and it'll come to you. And so you're still attached to being non-attached. But really the truth of non-attachment is to kind of have an experience of that unchanging nature, which is really hard to have an experience of, because it's unchanging. So we can only have experience of things that are changing. So it's kind of a puzzle in a way to experience that.
Yeah, I really like, my favorite philosopher is Lao Tse, because he simply says, well, sometimes we experience the multiplicity of things because we want to enjoy the world. And so it's beautiful in its separateness and its uniqueness and the way it moves, and that experience is pleasant to us. It's beautiful. And then he said, but sometimes we want to experience that wholeness, that oneness, and we go inward, right, and meditate. And it's no big deal. We move between these two realities, and if you understand what they are, you're not caught up in either one or the other.
Well, I like the idea too, is that part that's unchanging is really where the freedom lies. So we're always free, but we don't want to just be in that freedom. We want to have the excitement of life and the drama of life. That's why we're here. There's a reason for having an experience of this. Yeah. I mean, why would we put ourselves through it if it wasn't supposed to be fun and enjoyable and like kind of like watching a movie that has, is the hero going to make it? It's part of the adventure of life. The Upanishad says that there are two birds sitting in the tree of life. One bird that eats the sweet and sour fruits, while the other one watches in non-attachment. And that's what you're talking about, that there's two parts of us. The person, the individual soul that experiences the world and Maya, and then there's the one that is the pure awareness, the pure being, pure consciousness, that is who we are as well.
Yeah.
But they're both the same. But the Maya covers over the pure consciousness.
Yeah. And I think the emphasis, and a lot of people get caught up in this, in rejecting the physical reality because they think that's not spiritual. But it's a temporary practice most of the time, just to kind of take us away from that over-attachment and over-identification that we have with the body and the physical reality. But when you get to the deeper states of spiritual practices, all the mystical traditions are pointing to the same thing, that everything is awareness, everything is consciousness. There is no separation. There is no division. There's nothing outside of that pure awareness.
So you have a quote from Einstein.
Yes.
And I love that. You read it this morning, and I thought...
Maybe you can read it.
Okay. The mystic emotion is the finest emotion of which we are capable.
The germ.
the germ of all art and all science, true science, and the core of the true religious experience, Einstein. So the mystic emotion, I love that idea, the mystic emotion.
Yeah.
Because we don't think of emotion, we think of emotion as more human. But what's the mystic emotion? Is it like the bridge between human and spirit? Like it's part human, part spirit?
Yeah, it is the union of those things, because Einstein really saw that what he was doing was looking at the way this divine intelligence that we call the universe thinks. Like, how does it create these incredible things of light and matter and its interaction? And he says, well, it's that wonder that allows us to look at it and to think like it does, which means the old mythology of we're created in God's image, that's what it means, that we're able to perceive the way the creation is created, because we have that ability ourselves. At our source is that consciousness, that self-reflective consciousness. And he simply boils it down to the sense of awe, that we're in awe of the creation, and that connects us to that.
I just got goosebumps from that. Yeah, the awe is a good. And when we look at nature, we kind of have that feeling, that numinous quality. Jung would say the numinosity, where you kind of feel this, like you hear the birds and you hear nature, and everything's just seems so like balanced and beautiful and just. And even when we look at beautiful art or a loved one, we have this kind of, like this, we're in awe of something more sacred in us.
Absolutely.
And that's, I guess, what people are looking for. But what happens is they replace this awe, this spiritual experience with, let me get a brand new car, let me get a big house in the burbs and brag about, like, I have how many bedrooms, and let me go on all this travel and, have 1 million followers on Instagram, and these kind of human things, and everyone's really searching for, it's a kind of a cheap replacement for this awe.
Yeah I think what I see is people either trivialize mythology, spirituality, and they say, well, we don't need that anymore because we have science and we can do without all that stuff. That's not the right approach. But the other extreme isn't correct to me either, that we kind of hold up this, the spirituality is so high and mighty, and so
it's superior to science in a way,
that we will never reach it, or it's too powerful, or it's essentially who we are. It's right here with us. It's simply that it's hiding in plain sight. And I like what Vivekananda said. The way people talk about spirituality, you think that God never laughs. That sense of humor that we have, that's the divine in us, kind of laughing at itself. It's kind of a joy of just being and existing. And so I invite you guys to think in terms of, it's our everyday experience. The divine is not somewhere else to be found. It is to be found in our everyday experience.
Yes, that's what I was saying, that everything's symbolic. And like you said, I mean, just the fact that we're here and we're conscious of ourselves and we're able to have a conversation over like metal and electricity, talking about God. I mean, how wonderful is this? We're riding on a rock that's hurling through space. I mean, and that we're conscious of ourselves is just a miracle. There's some questions here, and there's a lot of them, so I'm just going to sum it down to one is, where does religion fall into this versus spirituality?
Yeah, there's a funny saying that says that God gave man or humans spirituality, and the devil said, let me help you organize it into a religion, right? That's a bit extreme, but but essentially, you can think of religion as the ritualization of that. Because if you think, what function does religion have? It ritualizes the spiritual teachings.
And so, for some people, that's the foundation that they can operate on. They don't want that kind of unstructured spiritual experiences. They need that kind of, it's written in the book. I follow the rules, like kind of more structured experience of God versus an unstructured and more open.
Yes,
and
but they can be split. In other words, people can be religious without really having spiritual understanding.
Because they're following rules.
Yeah, and vice versa. People can be very spiritual without necessarily being religious.
Yeah, spiritual but not religious.
But ideally, religions should be the place where you practice your spiritual essence or your spiritual beings.
And depending on your spiritual evolution, you know, sometimes religion is a good place to start. It's better than nothing. I mean, for me, I love the fact that I was raised Catholic because I was exposed to all the angels and the saints and kind of this mystical understanding of there's power bigger than me. And then sometimes I'll work with clients who have had no religion growing up, and it's kind of like it takes them longer to get to their spiritual life. They kind of they're conditioned to think in more practicality. So I wouldn't poo-poo religion because it does get us to ask those, kind of open it up to the possibility, the magic of spirituality. And then some people, like for me, there's aspects of Jesus's words or Christianity that I think are very beautiful and wonderful. And it doesn't mean that I have to do it by the book. Sorry, Mom. But it's still that there's a benefit from learning that. There's a book called Living Christ, Living Buddha, or Living Buddha, Living Christ. And they talk about the messages are very much the same. Yeah. And so, again, these indigenous healers I told you about, the religions of the world, there's the fundamental truth is really one. There's only one truth. And these things are leading you to that truth. So Krishna says to Arjuna, he said, how do I tell people that are doing a different path? He said, encourage them to be on their path because everything leads to the self. So everything is leading there. And that's what like you reminded me of that too, is there's no like, it's almost like this self is the center. And if you look at a mandala, there's many, many paths to that center. Some paths are a little more expedited than others because the ego can get you caught up in the duality of religion. And then Vedanta, what I love about it, it's non-dual. So you're getting into that more of the oneness, more of the powers within you versus projection.
Yeah, so we leave you with another quote by Rumi. He says, "Do not feel lonely. The entire universe is within you." That says it all.
That's all you have to say.
Yeah, it says it all.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your questions. We do have a new series starting next week, and it's on personality. So we're going to talk about personality tests. We're going to talk about trauma. We're going to talk about, what happens in our life. How does that really affect us? We're going to talk about, I can't remember the other ones, but we're going to talk all about personality and the ego and really kind of diving into what does it mean to have a personality and who we really are on a deep level.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in.
Yes.
And we'll see you next time.
Yes. Remember, you are one with God already. Take care. Bye-bye.